What is the greatest cigar you've smoked?
I'll have to say Davidoff Dom Perignon circa 94.
And what is your favourite go-to cigar?
Currently, the Punch Short to Punch.
An excellent answer. Thank you, brilliant. Welcome back to Cigar Keep, and I'm really, really thrilled to be talking to a man who kick-started everything for me back about 10, 12 years ago now, Eddie Sahakian. So lovely seeing you.
What an honour to be with you.
Great to have you here at Cigar Keep Towers.
Thank you very much.
What a journey we've been on. Now, let me just, for dear reader or dear viewer, just explain sort of mine and your background. Is that actually, before we do that, I'll make a point of it because Nick was the other person who's responsible for my cigar smoking habit. He complained last time that we didn't light up a cigar quick enough. So I think we should probably make a start. And you've brought along a absolute terrific, a kind of what I would say is a sort of signature cigar for Davidoff. It's the number 2.
Yes.
Now, would you want to do the honours?
I will be delighted. I brought the number 2 principally because of the time of day.
Yep.
It's relatively early.
It's a breakfast cigar.
It is. May I cut your cigar?
I would love that. Thank you very, very much.
It's what Davidoff referred to as a panatella and the Cubans refer to as a liguita.
Shall we try this? I've
Yeah,
got this
sure.
wonderful Linley ashtray which I have at home, and
Yes.
it has this rather nifty, quite smart-looking mini credit card
How lovely.
cutter.
With pleasure. It looks like a fine blade as well. So the number 2 is a 38 ring gauge, pigtailed, Corona Especial according to the Cubans, and it works really well in the blend that Davidoff have put together. It's a Dominican Connecticut shade wrapper. My father will punish me for using the blue flame, but that'll be later.
Well, your father uses a Bic lighter.
He uses a big or matches.
Yeah. And you know what? I've taken that and gone around the world saying, you know what? If Edward Sahakian uses a Bic lighter for cigars, you don't need to just use a sort of bit of cedar wood for solely cedar wood for lighting your cigars. You can kind of use anything you want as long as it's lit.
My father is the ultimate pragmatist, so that's. I hope that is lit for you.
Thank you very much. Now, you cutting and lighting cigars has become a sort of internet sensation because I believe something. I don't know if there's a sort of a kind of a more an elevated version of viral, but you've kind of gone viral in that from your videos with Kirby, the great Kirby, our man in Texas,
Yes.
Cigar Keep's great American, Kirby Allison.
He is remarkable. What Kirby's done with his videos, certainly for his own business and the people associated with, and for us, is extraordinary.
Great.
A dear friend, first and foremost, but I'm so grateful to what he's done for us. These little videos we've done with him have reached far more people than I could ever imagine.
That's super. And I think that, it speaks to what happens when two people discuss a passion. I think that, content is a subjective thing. Everyone has their own taste and everyone, likes what they like, but it's a really good formula if you get two people just discussing stuff that they clearly are in love with. And it's your fault, really, that I'm in love with cigars, because back in, it must have been 2011, 2012, I was headed to, it was 2012, I know exactly, I was headed to Cuba. And I was headed there only because I had been through this sort of journey of learning about Cuban cigars, because Nick, who I was working for at the time, said, go to Davidoff and ask for Eddie or Edward Sahakian and say that I told you to go there and learn about cigars. In I go. There's a roller from Cuba who happens to be there at the time. You were standing by the table and I say, hello, my name's Tom and I've been asked by Nick Fouts to come and introduce myself because he says I should learn about cigars. You pick one up you take me over to Franco's, you cut it, you light it for me, and then you tell me about what it is that I'm meant to be tasting. And it kind of went from there. And so it's been a long time. I mean, I didn't have any children back then. I mean, this is quite a journey. I mean, presumably though, with all due respect, your journey has been a bit longer than that, and you can kind of go back to your stories of when you first had a cigar lit for you, and you were taught about that. You taught about the experience of smoking a cigar. So why don't we just kick this off by you telling the viewers your version of the story that I just told you?
Yes, of course. First and foremost, what a pleasure it was to meet you. Cigars bring out the best in people, I believe that. And everything around cigars can often be so fortunate and delightful. My friendship with you is one of those very good examples. Nick's calling card needs no introduction. Anyone Nick says should meet, I will gladly meet. And I always know he will never send someone over who I wouldn't want to be friends with. And Tom, you're a fine example of that. One of my ablest students, if I may say.
Thank you very much.
Now my master.
I now have a website devoted to it. I mean, you clearly, you preach to the correct choir, and now I am a devotee, and I try and spread your message as far and wide as possible.
You've taken it far further than I ever could, and I'm so happy to see you enjoy it the way I enjoy it, the way my father enjoys it, the way Nick enjoys it. Cigars for me have been in the background of my life for as far as I remember. My father's always been a cigar smoker and indeed a pipe smoker, and in more recent years it's been a very important part of my life as a businessman as well. But first and foremost, it's a passion, and I think in this business you cannot, you probably can make money from it, but you cannot make it a long-term career choice if you don't love it, if it's not a passion, it doesn't burn inside you. It's very humble, really. Davidoff itself is a very humble beginning. Our own journey, perhaps not quite as humble, although we did arrive as refugees, albeit fortunate refugees in 78. And then my immediate exposure was my father opening Davidoff itself in 1980, the shop. My exposure as a young boy was coming into the shop and helping out. I was a pyromaniac from a young age, so matches and anything like that was wonderful. I still have a collection of matches I have kept.
Presumably too young to put them up against a cigar at that point.
Yes, but I was permitted to own them, and my mother kept them in the cupboard, and I've now inherited them. And the cigar crept into my life around the age of 16. And it was a punishment because my mother thought I was smoking cigarettes.
Okay.
So
interesting punishment.
Well, she found a
Classy
Zippo
lady.
in my pocket. That wasn't her idea.
Okay, I see. Okay, fine.
She merely went to my father and said, "I found a Zippo. He's smoking something. It could be cigarettes. It could be worse." You know, mothers dread everything immediately.
Of course.
And and my father called me in on a Saturday to the shop. I went in the morning, a little bit mysterious. And he got out a Davidoff number 2. That time it was a Cuban, and as he does beautifully, always disrobes it, takes it out, cuts it, lights it with matches, gorgeous. And normally he would then puff it himself. And we're sitting in the armchairs that are still there in Davidoff, and he handed it over to me. So here you go, son. This is for you. Dad, I don't smoke cigars. He looked at me a little cryptically and said, "Well." Irrespective, any time in your life, if you do want to smoke, only smoke the best. And I want to be the first one to give it to you. Here you are. Well, I accepted it, and we smoked together. And I can't say I fell in love with cigars at that point. It was an interesting flavor. I really wasn't a smoker then. I mean, it was truthfully, I had not tried cigarettes, nothing. I only collected Zippo lighters. And then that sort of stayed in my mind, and didn't touch a cigar again until my early 20s.
Okay.
And that's when I came back into the business, having failed miserably to study in America.
Okay. Can't imagine that's true. I think you're being humble. But
No, I'm very serious. I was at university there, and my commitment to my studies was threadbare, let's say, and my commitment to partying was gargantuan. And,
Okay.
and my father was unfortunately sponsoring that. So
Oh, I understand. Okay, yes.
so I owed him a lot of money.
Yeah, okay, fine.
I came back into the shop. He said, "You're not studying, so you might as well work." And it was an interesting time. It was getting towards the mid-90s, just before the big boom hit as a consequence of Cigar Aficionados launch in America, and the shop just went crazy. I mean, it was the first big boom I'd seen in cigars, and we had all sorts of interesting celebrities from Hollywood and other places visiting the shop regularly.
Yeah.
Business was booming. It was crowded. I like this. And I started smoking cigars, and of course I learnt about cigars, interacted with some really wonderful people. As a young man, I highly extol the advantage of working in retail, any youngster really, because it develops your personality. You're forced to be able to have a conversation with people from different walks of life, and it gives you confidence, whatever you end up doing in your life.
So in theory, we're smoking a kind of descendant of your first
Yes.
cigar. How marvellous.
Exactly right.
Gosh,
exactly right.
How marvellous.
Well, I'm sure you know the story with Davidoff. It was 67, according to legend, that the first Cuban Davidoffs were produced by Cuba for Zeno to be sold in his shop exclusively to honor really the reputation and amazing achievements that he had already. You know, his shop had been a roaring success for 30, 40 years by then in Geneva. And the cigars were beautiful. My father fell in love with them in the 70s. And for many people, they were the non plus ultra of Cuba.
Okay.
Forget Cohiba, which technically was created in 1966. And perhaps Dunhill was the only competitor to Davidoff as the best Cuban out there. That all ended, unfortunately, in 91/92. I've seen some boxes dated 1992, although officially 91 was the last year of production. And Davidoff did what we thought at the time was a catastrophic mistake of moving production to Dominican Republic. Totally different origin. At that time, Dominican was really a very small part of the cigar map, and not famous for much in the cigar world. They produced tobacco, of course. And Dr. Schneider, who was the chairman of Oettinger Davidoff Group, and a visionary, he was the one who had originally purchased the shop and the brand name Davidoff from Zeno in the early 70s.
Yeah.
He had
having had lunch with your father at Wilton's as well. Didn't they meet?
Well, that was later. That was so my father's first meeting with Dr. Schneider would have been in I believe it was 79.
Okay, 79. Okay.
So by this point, he'd already made the purchase of.
Great.
And Dad knew the shop and just thought it'd be a good idea if he could buy his Davidoffs in London. I mean, that was the genesis of his idea.
Yes.
Facilitated by a wonderful dear friend who was his lawyer at the time.
Yes, of course. Yes.
So that was a sort of aside, but Davidoff itself and the success of Davidoff as a brand was Dr. Schneider and his move to Dominican Republic in 91, 92, and taking full control, vertically integrating everything to do with the quality and production of the cigar. He met a then young, very, very talented cigar maker, Henke Kellner.
Yep.
And they partnered up on the production there, and it went from strength to strength, and it perfectly timed the cigar boom that then happened 3-4 years later in America. And Davidoff were able to sell into the largest cigar market in the world by a long way, legally.
Yeah.
Of course, if they'd been Cuban, it would have been a big problem.
Yes. Could you tell me about, speaking of Cuba, your first time in Cuba and the things you saw and whether that opened your eyes up to the world of Cuban cigars?
Yes, so my first visit was very fortunate. It was 1997. So I'd been in the shop for a few years at this point, and it was becoming a real celebrity occasion, having a cigar and Cuban cigars and cigar aficionado and so on. So Cuba had the first of really what became the Festival de Habanos in February. And
yes, because that's not that old an award ceremony, is it? It kind of feels like this sort of august, ancient thing.
yes,
But it's actually not that old.
you're exactly right. It is from about that period, and the festival was ostensibly to commemorate Cohiba's 30th anniversary.
Okay.
So it was in 97 to commemorate 96, technically. And it was, they weren't quite sure what it was. There were a few events organized, and we went on group. We were guests of Hunters and Franca, of course, and some interesting people were there. I was with my father, my first time to Cuba, didn't have a girlfriend. I fell in love not just with the country, but with the girls,
Sure.
the rum,
Yep.
the cigars, and I think as a human being, you cannot help but be touched by the resilience and the personality of the Cubans. What a place.
I agree. Yes, I
you've
completely
seen
agree.
it.
Yeah, I've seen it. Because the thing is that I remember I had a holiday organised, but I didn't know where to go. And you said, "Why don't you go to Cuba?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." And I went on my own. I think I went on my own only because I sort of felt bolstered by your sort of the confidence you injected in me to go, and you hooked me up with Toby, as well. I very much share your sentiments about Cuba, but it wasn't something that completely tied you to Davidoff or the shop at that point, because you had a hiatus before coming back now permanently.
Yes.
Could you tell us about the sort of that moment that was you away from the shop and then what brought you back into the fold?
Yes, certainly. So, so having returned to the shop, this is in the 90s as a sort of punishment, and being paid a very small wage, intentionally by my father as a sort of salutary lesson in life, a very important one for me. All my friends were flourishing or many of them were flourishing in banking, and they would have, my peers, they would have graduated in '94. They were already earning big money at the time, buying their first apartments, paying down the mortgage in 2 years, and I was living at home.
Yep.
Couldn't afford a car. The fun I had was thanks to my parents and a little supplement they would help me with. And I quickly realized that actually an education at university level was important if I wanted to do what they were doing, which was make a lot of money quickly.
Yep.
Didn't care what I did. And finance seemed to be the obvious choice. I went back to school, but this time in London, City University. I did the undergraduate business studies degree. It was a 3-year course. As a mature student, I should say, I was only a few years older than everyone else.
Okay, but still.
It was, the gap was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Because they were all 18. They were like I was when I went to America.
Yeah.
I was looking at them thinking, you fools.
Yeah.
The ones who weren't
You know
studying,
nothing.
you will regret that. And I was the really geeky guy at the front, taking notes and constantly asking questions. But anyhow, I did quite well. Got my degree there, and my pure ambition was to make as much money as quickly as possible.
Sure.
I had my first meeting with a very fortuitous circumstance and gentleman who was the husband of my French teacher when I was at prep school.
Okay.
So this is going back to when I was 10, 11, 12, Hill House. My French teacher, Yvette Redjewel, delightful lady. We kept in touch. My parents kept in touch for many, many years. Her husband was working at CIBC at the time, in-house counsel for the asset securitization team. And when my mother mentioned to her that Eddie would love to get into the city, he's coming to the end of his degree, could Howard give him some advice? She said, of course. Let them meet and he'll explain. So I met Howard thinking he'll tell me, well, the city is a wonderful place and, you should try this, you should maybe look at that, da-da-da-da. And he said, within 10 minutes, he said, well, we're actually looking for potentially a junior analyst in our group, securitization. Are you interested? And I thought securitization. I said, what is securitization? He explained it to me. And I said, well, I'd love to interview, of course. I'd be delighted. I met, interviewed, got the job. Didn't even try anything else. The first thing that came my way, I grabbed it. And I joined the group. So this was 99.
Okay.
And I stayed in what is really structured finance. It's a sort of a form of secured lending. Very interesting academically. Um, Developed my skills as a quantitative analyst.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot tell you how good that was for me. I never studied law, but I always had pretensions that I could have been a lawyer. And the type of documents we had to read, the legal documents that supported the deals, were very intensive.
Yeah.
So I kind of went through a crash course in corporate finance law, at least.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it. So the first 2-3 years, delightful. I loved it. Hard work, long hours, got paid well, and there I was.
Yeah.
And then, like with most things in the city, when your heart's not in it, it's not a pleasure.
Sure.
It's a objective to earn as much money as possible.
Okay.
The sentiments and the people you're surrounded by are not the sort of people that I think harmonize with my personality.
Okay.
Eventually, I found my way to RBS about 1.5 years, 2 years before the great crash. By May 2008, it was very clear to a group of us that we were not going to stay there much longer. They were going to get rid of us. So we had about a 2-3 month period when we literally didn't have to do anything. We were just waiting for the axe to fall. It did. And at that point, my wife was pregnant with my first child.
Right. Yep.
Luckily, we were looked after well by the bank, and we were given enough to, I would say, amortize 18 months of doing nothing.
Okay.
And I took full advantage of that. I was at home when my son was born.
Great.
I was able to really be relaxed, having gone through a very stressful period. Of course, reality set in at some point.
Yeah.
What am I going to do next?
Well, the early nights and the crying and the nappies.
Yes, that is a great incentive.
Yeah.
And my role didn't exist. So this is when my father, in his infinite wisdom, said, "Eddie, what are you going to do? Do you think eventually?"
Fathers never let up,
yeah.
do they?
And
You
I
could
said,
be a
"Well,"
grown man with children, and they still
and
want
always
to know.
right. And he was quite right. He sort of prompted me to well, I don't know what I'm going to do, truthfully. And he said, "Well, while you decide, can you help out at the shop maybe? You want to come to the shop and have a look around?" And I said, "Sure. I'm not going to do that, Dad. I don't think I'm going to be back in the business, but I would love to come and help if I can."
Okay.
So I went in, and the first day, it was one of those magic moments where I walked in, and I went, "God, it's lovely. The shop looks great." A few people walked in, started chatting. They were smiling. They wanted a cigar. We could help them. They left joyfully. We had a transaction.
Yeah.
And I sat in the chair with my father, had a cigar, and I looked at him, I said, "Dad, this is amazing." He goes, "Yeah, it's not bad, is it?" And that was it. I was back in.
Because it is a haven. I mean, it is a place of pilgrimage for a lot of people. People travel the world, and that's where they go. And some extremely notorious people do exactly that. They don't come to London without a trip to Davidoff. There is something about what you and your father have done there that has instilled a personality that is not common across the kind of retail board, even in cigars. What we were saying earlier about passions and cigars bringing the best out of people. There is a lot to that, but certainly Davidoff of London becomes an exemplar of that, and this sort of ebullience that you and your father have is both tangible and also contagious to everybody who leaves the shop. I mean, hard to keep up over all these years, I'm sure. But but okay, so day one, it kind of
it
kept you there.
re-clicked. It
How
re-clicked,
great.
and it clicked. Sometimes in life, you meet a romantic counterparty. Right person, wrong time.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to meet them again at the right time, love blossoms. And it was exactly the same with the shop for me. It was the wrong time, right place, wrong time in my early 20s. In my early 30s, with a family in place, having worked for other people,
Yeah.
selling products I didn't care much about, to people who didn't really want to buy it, and there was always a loser in the transaction. There was a winner and a loser. That was the nature of, investment banking at the time. I came into a business where we were selling pleasure.
Yeah.
Not just that, But I got to stand on my father's shoulders. I am still standing on my father's shoulders. Everything that has been successful about Davidoff, of course, the team, the wider team is really important. The brand is very important. The location is very important. But the crucial ingredient is my father.
Yeah.
His charm, his business acumen, how he looks after people, his philosophy on customer service is second to none, and his natural diplomacy. I am always learning. When I watch him, even today, everything he does constantly surprises me. There's occasions where I think I would say this, and he says the opposite, and then I realize, of course, the long term is correct. So how lucky I am, and I'm still standing on the shoulders. I still work with him. He comes to the shop regularly. My small innovations, perhaps, he's very good at putting forward and saying, "Well done, you've done wonderful things." But I know that it's based on a very, very strong foundation he's laid, and it's been just an absolute joy for me. It continues to be that.
Super, a very great man. Well, let's talk about now that you embedded yourself in the business. Let's talk about cigars as they sort of developed to today, because we've recently seen a kind of shift in the way that Habanos operate in terms of pricing across the board that re-employs your analyst brain somewhat, does it not? Why don't we talk about, not go straight to that, but certainly talk about the broader change in terms of the customer profile, the habits, and the accessibility of cigars from when you rejoined Davidoff. Like, what have you seen? What have been the big changes that have occurred that you have particularly piqued your interest and you think have made the most impact on the industry?
Well, in the last 5 years, I would say, we've seen an acceleration of the trends we began to pick up in 2008, 2009. The backdrop to cigars, probably the backdrop to almost any collectible asset class, has been the largesse by which central banks have flooded everything with money, cheap money at that.
Yeah.
Without interest rates at ludicrously low levels for as long as they've been, without the quantitative easing that's taken place, and without the sort of what they term globalization, but really the exportation of costs and importation of cheap labor, we would not be where we are. And where we are is a ton of money is chasing collectible items.
Yeah.
And that's picked up pace faster and faster and faster. In the last 5 years, perhaps, it's almost become exponential. And I think what Cuba have done with the pricing on Cohibas and Trinidads and some of the other individual lines within the other brands is the logical, obvious expression of that. They have looked and said, well, if Patek Philippe should cost the same everywhere in the world, and frankly, if you want it, you can't get it, why should a Cohiba be any different? Why should a Trinidad be any different?
So you see cigars in the same sort of asset class as something like watches and potentially vintage cars and wines and stuff?
Some cigars.
Okay.
And for some people.
Okay.
I am, as a retailer, sitting directly on the fence. One side of me is a smoker.
Yes.
And a collector, and I'm deeply frustrated and annoyed that I can't buy the cigars I always want when I want at a price that I deem acceptable.
Which is an extraordinary thing for someone to say who is, in theory, the person with the most accessibility to cigars. Because you're a merchant, you have the access to the importers in a way that the common or garden consumer does not.
Well, yes, it's one way to look at it, but I see it differently because I'm typically the last person to smoke a cigar that is rare.
Okay.
And I'm the first person to smoke a cigar that is broken and unsellable in my shop.
Yeah, okay.
And that's just the Armenian in me.
Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, okay, yeah.
You are right. I'm in a privileged position. I could, hoard and sort of divert for my own collection, but that's not the way we are.
Sure.
It begins with looking after our customers, always well. Of course, I'll try something. We're lucky that in the industry, we're able to do that. But if there's a new release, very difficult to find limited edition, and we get very little of it. I'm certainly not going to indulge. I will allow my customers to purchase them. And I say allow, it sounds ridiculous, but we're in a world where we're in a position that we have to choose.
Again, not unlike watches.
Yes.
There are watch brands who choose. They know who they're going to offer it to before the watch even arrives in the shop. They sort of think this will go to. We'll have 2 of these, and this will go to this person before, and we offer it to anyone else.
Well, we're there with some of the Cohibas and with the odd limited edition releases, and our approach is to democratize it to some degree. So if we get a box and we're going to sell it, we'll put it on the shelf.
Yes.
For single sale. Because truthfully, there are customers who, if I had 1,000 boxes, they would take them all individually.
Yep.
One customer. And that's just unsustainable.
Yes, no, yes. Well, I remember somebody came in and asking you once for more boxes of the, was it the Britannicus Extra? Was it the regional from?
Yes, we've had with the regional and
the La Gloria Cubana Britannicus Extra.
Yes.
Somebody came in and asked you for 250 boxes, and you were sort of like, "We've only got sort of 50."
Yes. And with the talisman, I don't know if you recall.
So good they made it twice. Talisman. Sorry, Cuba. I don't mean to take the piss.
I will not forget it. We had the UK exclusive. I mean, not just us. The UK market did.
Yeah.
And in November, when it was released, the day after it was released, we had a lady. I think she was Chinese, very humbly dressed, big backpack on her back. Walked in. Hello, good morning. Yeah. I would like Cohiba talisman. Oh yes, okay. Yeah, we have some. How many would you like? I would like 100 boxes.
Okay.
And sorry, man, I can't sell you 100 boxes. If you want, I have maybe 5 boxes available. No, 100 boxes or nothing. I said, well, then nothing. And she said, okay, and off she went. And then a few hours later, one of my friends in JJ Fox came on and said, oh, you won't believe it. This woman came in and bought 100 boxes of talisman from us. I said, you sold her 100 boxes of talisman? Well, yeah.
Sales are sale. I mean, I've heard, and you could potentially correct me or not on this, is that the conversation about China and Cuba is a big one. But I hear that EMS plays a big part in terms of how the type of cigars that the Chinese want. They want the EMS ones because they understand quality and they understand that the EMS labelled or the ones that are marked US are of a sufficient grade that they would actually want, which is probably why they're willing to fly from China to London to buy the cigar before flying back. In the way that the Japanese used to do with shoes, because there was a leather tax that meant that it was easier to come to the UK and buy shoes, or handmade shoes, proper shoes. So is that true? Is the UK market still sort of seen as the kind of a kind of premium market against a lot of the others?
Yes, that's a really important point. It doesn't matter for everyone, but for the discerning collector, an EMS mark on the box is the most collectible variant of that. Even if I was to create a sort of Champions League of and rank them, I would probably say the UK and probably Switzerland really sit at the top.
Yeah.
And then still very good stock, but as you cascade down into some of the less expensive markets, the ones where and there's a logical reason for it. Let's use Spain as an example, not to pick on them. They have a wonderful market for cigars there, but they are capped at about 8 to 10% profit that the retailer can earn selling any tobacco, whether it's a pack of cigarettes or a box of cigars. The incentive for them to look after and curate and care for boxes of cigars over a long period of time is minimal.
Yeah, okay.
You really have to be an act of passion to do that, because you can only ever earn 8% on the original price it came out at.
Right, okay. I understand. Gosh. Okay, well that makes it makes a huge difference. It's very and I think that potentially the change in that might affect the Spanish market for the worse, because if they're even more expensive and the retailers still can't get more profit on that, I mean, that's quite damaging potentially.
Yes, it is, and the step change in a market like Spain would be 200-300%.
Yes, I've heard
on
this.
a Cohiba.
Yeah.
In the UK, it was still punitive. It was close to 100% on some of the lines.
You use the word punitive. Do you see this as are you positive about this change or not?
I think, unfortunately, it's an inevitable outcome of the supply shortages,
Yep.
the excess demand, and the luxury product in the middle.
Okay.
And Cuba could have gone the wrong way. They could have watered down quality control and pushed out volume to match demand. That would have been to everyone's net loss. Cuba would have made a little bit more money in the first couple of years, and then we would all suffer.
Yep.
And it would harm the brand. Reassuringly, what they seem to have done is retained the correct quality control, and that's resulted in very, very low quantities of the more desirable Cohibas coming out. That has pushed up prices where possible, certainly in the UK market, and that will protect the brand. That will mean Cohiba, sadly, is obtainable by fewer and fewer people as a percentage of their income, but it will continue to be a very valued brand, and it will continue to do that.
And so what does somebody do who's a new smoker, who comes into an interest in their own passion in cigars and wants to create a collection for themselves? I mean, what do you think the best steps are that's attainable?
Well, I'm asked often, should I collect cigars? Should I invest in cigars? I mean, that's really an important question. Wine has proven to be a good investment sometimes. Whiskey, cigars can and should sit in that same category of it's a perishable, it's a luxury, it's handcrafted. There's many, many qualities behind it. If you're coming into it, I would say begin by smoking a varied portfolio of cigars. Don't jump in and start collecting without experiencing what you like.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than owning and collecting cigars you don't enjoy, even if they will ultimately make you money. Because the advice my father always gave me, and it's given many times to others, and it's probably the same for art, is collect cigars that you would be happy to smoke one day.
Yep.
If you are, then you have the ultimate get-out clause. If everything goes to pot, market crashes, cigars aren't worth much anymore, you have years of pleasure ahead of you.
Yes, great. Yeah.
You've invested in your pleasure. And that's the very important question. When someone comes into my shop and says, oof, Cohibas are expensive now. They're £60 for a Robusto. I agree with them, yes, but it's very relative. An hour of pleasure for one person is worth X. For another person, it's worth 2 times X. For another person, half of X.
Yeah.
How do you value that? And that's really what you're buying, and that's really what we're selling. And a cigar can transport you to places very few other luxury products can.
Yes, I agree with that. And am I able to put you on the spot and say, or ask, if there is a cigar in your mind that is perhaps and I'm not asking this for, buying for appreciation purposes, but simply for the new smoker who's going in, who isn't able to afford a Cohiba, for example, now that the prices have gone up, or a Trinidad, what would you say is the great cigar to go to that is among the cigars that haven't been hit by a large price hike?
Almost anything in Hoyo de Monterrey,
Yep.
which has been practically untouched by the price increases.
Okay.
And you have a beautiful selection of sizes there. In Monte Cristo, in the standard lines, they've been available and they're produced in volume, but if you don't mind the slimmer gauges, the Monte Cristo number 3, a superlative Corona.
Yeah.
The number 1, a wonderful Lonsdale. The number 2 continues to be a fantastic Pyramid. There's no denying that. And they're made easily accessible, no trouble with that.
The Monte Cristo number 2 is, I mean, an absolute stonker. I mean, I don't think I've ever been disappointed by one.
Yes, exactly right. And you have a magic ingredient. Every person has a magic ingredient, which is put it away, keep it,
Yep.
buy it today, age it. Because age will always improve a Cuban cigar for its first 5 to 10 years. You have no downside to that, merely the deferred pleasure.
Yeah, you do. the patience required. I've been slapped on the wrist by Aaron Sigmund for saying New World. So I'm trying not to use New World in terms of non-Cuban cigars.
Yes.
What are we seeing there in terms of the way that they're kind of stepping up to the plate to compete with Cuba? Because, you know, I know that in America it is a huge market and you can't really get Cuban cigars there. And you can't, it isn't necessarily sort of, you don't go into a shop and there's a Cuban cigar ready for you to buy. I'm sure there are ways of getting it, but nevertheless, what are they doing and who's really stepping up to the plate and making their mark that people should really think about when it comes to purchasing cigars? Davidoff, obviously, we can kind of take that as read. So, but let's talk about what these nations and brands are doing.
Yes, exactly that. They've stepped into the breach. They've recognized the supply issues from Cuba side, and they are making exceptional cigars on quality in terms of construction and quality control. They are on par, if not ahead of Cuba. No question about that. What they also have is this amazing varied palette. They're painting with the full gamut of colors. Cuba is admittedly, they have a really good color, which is Cuban tobacco, but that's it. All the other producers are very innovative in sourcing different origin leaves, different types of leaves for all the components, the filler, the wrapper, the binder. And this allows them to create much more variety on the blends.
It's interesting you say that. I went to Casa Fuente, and I was chatting to Carlito, and we were talking about Medio Tiempo. He was like, Medio Tiempo is in loads of his cigars. You know, we talk about Bajiques, and I mean, let's not get started on the cost of what's happened there. I mean, it's extraordinary, and the kind of marketing thing with the Bajique partly was the addition of this fourth leaf.
Yes.
If you go to non-Cuban cigars, it's everywhere. You know, that's not a hard thing to find. It's not an exotic, rare leaf that's used in the blend. You find it commonly.
Yes, well said. It's a remarkable marketing step. And Fuente, you mentioned, what a great portfolio of cigars they have. You know, it's one of my favorites, and it's one of the most desirable cigars on my shelf, including Cubans.
Yes, are you constantly pointing at Fuente say, gone?
Yes.
I mean, when I went, actually, you were like, if you find any Lanceros, please bring it back. And there weren't any there.
No, I still hunt for those.
Yeah.
But you know, they're a really good example.
Weirdly, I bought you some Bajique instead, didn't I? Because they were available. Yes. More available in the Dominican Republic than Opus X. I mean, that's quite something.
It says it all. And have you been to Nicaragua yet?
No, I haven't. No, I'm afraid not.
I have also not had the pleasure, but I can't wait to go because in Nicaragua you have one of my other favorite companies, Padron.
Yes, great.
And again, they are on par with Fuente in the US market as highly desirable, very difficult to obtain, and very expensive relative to the other cigars.
Yeah.
And with good reason. We have a mutual friend, Shari, who loves Padron.
Has one every day. Swears by them.
Well, his palate is probably...
I should say one a day minimum.
Yeah. He can handle the full strength of all the Padron range.
Yes.
For me, some of the family reserves can be a little bit too punchy for everyday smoking. But each to their own. The quality is amazing. Branding's fantastic, of course. Very limited supply. So, you know, that's on my list. Padron, Fuente for sure. And then you have my father's cigars, beautiful, beautiful range. You have La Flor Dominicana.
Yep.
You know, the Andalusian Bull was a spectacular success in the UK market. You have Oliva coming out of Nicaragua.
Yep.
You know, they are really popular, great cigars, well priced. You have Regius, which is, for me, the best value cigar we have on our shelf. Nicaraguan producer. It comes in almost half the price of everything else. And for what you're paying to what you're smoking, it's a light to medium Nicaraguan, delightful. Davidoff we've touched on. And as I sort of cascade through my shelf, every day we are looking at new cigars to put in from, excuse me, Aaron, the New World.
Yeah.
And they are filling in the gaps on my shelves.
Yeah.
And my sales are not suffering.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. In the past, we were dealing with 40, 50, 60-year-old gentlemen mostly, smoked Cubans their whole life, didn't want to change. Today we are dealing with 20-somethings, early 30s perhaps, experimental palates, not committed to Cuba, perhaps never even smoked a Cuban.
Yeah.
Buying online, reading up on the brand stories online, very engaged with the social media stories behind the brands. They are setting a new, call it approach, a new palette, and the New World has so much to offer them. And that, I think, is a trend that will continue. And the existential issue for Cuba is they are now making perhaps 40, 50 million cigars, long filler, handmade, compared to 200, 300, 400 million in aggregate coming out of Nicaragua and Dominican. And that means there's that many more people smoking non-Cubans. If that continues for 10, 15, 20 years, Cuba doesn't expand production. They will always have a place in the market, but they will be a small part of a very big market.
That's fascinating. Gosh. May I just say a huge thank you for coming and joining us at Cigar Keep Towers today. I'm so thrilled to have you here and to sort of squeeze you like a lemon for your wisdom and your knowledge on a topic that fascinates all of us and that we all love. And it's you and I have had conversation after conversation that is sort of on a casual level, on a friendship level. So I apologise that we're talking shop in a sort of serious manner, but I couldn't be more privileged to be able to sort of tap you for information. So thank you very, very much.
Tom, you are so kind to say that. The honour is entirely mine. And may I say my entire compliments, and we are in awe of what you're doing at Cigar Keep. We needed that, and you have filled a gap that just needed to be filled so elegantly and so well. May you have all the success with Cigar Keep, and thank you for allowing me the honour of being part of it.
Lovely seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.